In January 2020, we started work on a project called Grief, a study of human emotional experience. The project runs for 4 years and is funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council. I'm Louise Richardson, one of the project team members, along with Matthew Radcliffe, who leads the project, and Becky Miller, the first of our 2 postdocs. All of us who care deeply for someone and outlive them will experience grief. The experience of grief is not only profoundly distressing, but also often bewildering in ways that people do not expect and find difficult to put into words. For example, when people write about their experience of grief, they often describe a painful conflict between belief and disbelief. They know that the person has died, but somehow they do not accept it. Also common is a pronounced and pervasive change in how the surrounding world seems. It's not just that one's loved one has gone, but that everything is somehow different. C.S. Lewis wrote after the death of his wife, "The act of living is different through and through. Her absence is like the sky, spread over everything." Disruptions to relationships with others are also reported, as well as alterations to the experience of time. Some bereaved people describe feeling as if time is no longer moving forward, that they are stuck in the present. Furthermore, bereaved people frequently describe experiences of an enduring connection to their deceased loved one, sometimes involving a sense of their presence in the immediate environment. All these fascinating descriptions invite philosophical investigation. For example, in what does the conflict between belief and disbelief really consist? And how and why might everything seem different when someone dies? How should we understand the experiences of the presence of the deceased? What kind of experience are these, and what roles might they play in grieving? And in the background, other intriguing and underexplored questions lie. What is grief? An obvious answer is that it's an emotion, like happiness or fear. But unlike these emotions, it's not a brief episode. It can last for months and years, it changes over time, and it's often described as coming in waves. Grief ebbs and flows, and someone who grieves for a year will feel very differently at different times during that year. Furthermore, as we've already seen, grief seems to involve many different phenomena, not only feelings, but also experiences of the surrounding world, beliefs and habits of thought and action. How do these items hang together? In virtue of what do they all count as elements of grief? Though grief is a very common experience, most of us don't give it much thought until it hits us. But grief has been brought to the forefront of many people's minds during the pandemic. At the time of recording, there have been over 490,000 deaths associated officially with COVID-19. Behind those figures are a great many grieving people, and we're seeing their stories in newspapers and other news outlets. The pandemic and the measures taken to reduce the spread of the virus seem also to be having significant effects on how people grieve, which raises further questions that the project team have been considering. Some of the most troubling news stories we've read are about people who've not been able to be with their loved ones when they died, or have been unable to hold funerals or other rituals in the normal way. What happens to grief in these cases? What's the effect of being unable to be with a loved one when they die? At a funeral, a bereaved person is able to share their grief with others and be comforted by familiar rituals. Where this is not possible, they may feel especially alone with their grief, and when they return from the funeral, social distancing rules may mean that they have no one to discuss their memories with, to build a narrative, as it were, of the life that has ended. Does this make it harder to accept or really believe that the person has gone? Will grief last longer than usual in these circumstances, or unfold in an unusual way? And what does this tell us about, for example, the distinction between healthy and unhealthy grief, which might need medical treatment. In the context of the pandemic, we're also studying other experiences of loss that people have been referring to as grief. The experience of being under lockdown has for many been painful and confusing, sometimes at least. No doubt this pain and confusion has many sources: anxiety or boredom or fear, for example. Early in the pandemic, a number of online popular articles suggested that what we were experiencing was also in part a kind of grief. Not grief over the death of a person, but grief over other kinds of losses. People have experienced, for example, the loss of particular events that they'd expected, such as weddings, school proms, and exams. They may also have felt the loss of a sense of normality or of economic or other kinds of security. We've been thinking about what experiences of these kinds of losses consist in. How do they differ from grief over the loss of a person? What do they have in common with the grief that follows a death? A common sight during the pandemic has been closed-off, taped-up play areas. When you walk past such a thing, you might feel a strong and sad sense of the absence of playing children. Perhaps you feel the loss of normal life more generally. This might affect how the world seems. Maybe it seems bereft, empty. Here's a second example. Those starting their final term of school this spring will have expected a whole raft of meaning-laden end-of-school rituals, some formal, such as exams and school proms and prize givings, and some less formal. The summer after school ends is an important time of transition. But during the pandemic, people in this group have found much that they might have expected cancelled or curtailed. One overarching theme we're currently exploring is that these forms of experience, like grief over the loss of a person, involves a sense of lost possibilities. After events such as the death of a public figure, an act of terrorism, or a natural disaster, it's sometimes said that we grieve collectively as a nation, say, or as a city. The same might be true during or after the pandemic. We've been thinking about what collective grief might be. Is it just a convenient way of talking? Or is there some sense in which an emotion can belong to a group rather than an individual? Does collective grief feel different to grieving alone? And are there different kinds of collective grief? It seems on the face of it that there are. The grief that a family may feel together over the loss of a child is not the same as the grief of a nation over the loss of some of its citizens. Over the next 3.5 years, we'll be holding events and publishing books and papers about grief. Which questions we address and how we address them will have been changed by the COVID-19 pandemic. If you're interested in exploring these issues with us, you can sign up to our mailing list to be kept up to date by contacting us at the project email address. We're also planning an exciting new third-year module, which will allow students to think about grief with us as apprentices in our project.